God peace.
The flight had been completely normal, almost peaceful. The engines hummed like a soothing lullaby as the aircraft cut through the clear blue sky thousands of feet above the ground. Some passengers were watching movies, some were sleeping with headphones on, and others were simply staring out of the window, lost in their own thoughts, while clouds drifted beneath them like soft pillows. Flight attendants moved gracefully down the aisle, offering drinks and smiles that made everything feel safe, calm, and ordinary. No one had even the slightest hint that the next few minutes would turn a routine journey into a terrifying fight for survival. Inside the cockpit, the captain sat confidently at the controls, checking gauges and chatting casually with the co-pilot. They had flown this route hundreds of times, and today seemed no different. But fate doesn't always knock before it enters. Sometimes it storms in without warning. It started with something small, a short breath, a hand tightening on the control column, a sudden stiffness in the shoulders. The captain blinked hard as if trying to regain focus. The co-pilot turned toward him, confused. "Are you okay, sir?" There was no reply, only a final gasp before the captain's body slumped sideways, collapsing into the seat. At first, the co-pilot thought he had only fainted, but when the screens flashed red warnings and the aircraft nose dropped slightly, panic shot through him. He called the captain's name again, louder, shaking his shoulder. Nothing. The captain was unconscious, unresponsive, gone from this moment when he was needed the most. The co-pilot instantly grabbed the controls, trying to steady the aircraft, but his voice trembled as fear wrapped its cold fingers around his heart. He radioed the nearest control tower. "Mayday, we have a medical emergency. Captain is unresponsive." Those words echoed through the cabin like invisible shockwaves, though passengers were still unaware of the danger growing ahead of them. And then it happened. The plane suddenly dipped. Just a second, but a second in the air feels like a lifetime. Coffee cups rattled, seatbelts strained, someone screamed, a child woke up crying. Passengers looked around at each other with wide, confused eyes. The flight attendants tried to stay calm, but their faces said everything. Something was terribly wrong. Then the alarm sounds began. A shrill, terrifying beep, 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 each one louder, faster, more urgent. The aircraft shook slightly, like it was being pulled downward by an invisible force. Fear spread faster than wildfire. A wave of panic crashed through the cabin. People gasped. Some gripped their armrests, while others whispered prayers under their breath. What's happening? Is everything okay? Why are we dropping? No one had answers. Flight attendants rushed toward the cockpit, their hands trembling, knocking desperately on the locked door. "Captain, sir, are you all right?" No reply, just the high-pitched wail of alarms on the other side. The co-pilot cracked the door open for them, his face pale as snow. When they saw the captain unconscious, head leaning lifelessly to the side, their hearts froze. All training they had received told them what to do, but nothing prepared them for this exact moment. A massive aircraft in the air with only one pilot outside, and he was terrified too. Passengers saw flight attendants rushing back and forth with medical kits, trying to help the captain while the co-pilot struggled to manage the plane alone. The mood turned from confusion to worry to terror. Voices rose. "We're going to crash. Someone help us. Do something." Chaos was just seconds away from exploding. Then everything changed. From the middle of the aircraft, a woman slowly stood up. She wasn't panicking like everyone else. Her face wasn't frozen in fear. Her steps weren't shaky. She simply stood straight, calm, focused, determined, as if she had been waiting her whole life for this exact moment. She looked toward the front of the plane and spoke clearly, loudly enough to cut through the noise. "I can fly." For a moment, silence. Every pair of eyes turned to her. Passengers stared in disbelief. Was she serious? Was she insane? Or was this their only chance to live? Her voice wasn't shaking. Her gaze didn't break. She repeated, slower and stronger, "I can fly." The flight attendants stopped in their tracks. One rushed toward her, desperate for any hope. "Have you flown before?" "Yes," she answered instantly. "I've flown small aircraft. I know controls. I can help the co-pilot." Suddenly all the passengers, who had been strangers only minutes before, were united by one single emotion: hope. Hope resting on this 30-year old woman who had stepped forward like a hero from the shadows. Some people nodded toward her, tears of relief in their eyes. Others whispered, unsure whether to trust her or fear what might happen next. Even the children looked up at her like she was someone meant to save them. She stepped into the aisle. The plane shook again. A baby screamed. A man clutched his seat, whispering, "Please, please." Everyone watched as she walked toward the cockpit, toward the danger, with the bravery most people only dream of. One thought echoed inside every heart on that plane: who is she? A miracle? A guardian angel? Or just a stranger bold enough to try? No one knew her name, no one knew her story, but right now none of that mattered. The only thing that mattered was that she stood up when the world needed someone, anyone, to save them. She placed her hand on the cockpit door and took a deep breath. Behind that door was fear, alarms, chaos, the unconscious captain, and the possibility of death. But in her eyes burned something stronger, the belief that she could do this. And in that moment, hope, fragile but powerful, returned to the sky. Because when everyone else froze, she dared to say the words that might save 180 lives. "I can fly." The moment she declared, "I can fly," everything in the aircraft changed. Flight attendants, who had been moments away from losing control of the situation, suddenly found direction. They rushed toward her, guiding her with urgency, not because they fully believed she could do it, but because... What other choice did they have? Every second was slipping away like sand through trembling fingers. As she walked forward, her steps grew heavier, not from hesitation, but from the crushing weight of 180 lives now hanging upon her shoulders. Her heartbeat felt loud inside her chest, like the pounding of aircraft engines. Her hands were shaking, not out of fear of death, but from the realization that she was stepping into something she had never imagined she would face again. She was not a commercial pilot. She had flown only small propeller aircraft years ago, back when flying was a passion she never thought would become necessary to survive. Those memories rushed through her mind now, a younger version of herself, smiling in sunlight, gripping controls with confidence, feeling the wind as if she owned the sky. But this was not a sunny day in a two-seater plane. This was a full-sized passenger jet, a giant metal bird built for professionals, guided by countless systems she'd never even touched. She swallowed hard, reminding herself, a plane is a plane, lift, thrust, drag, gravity, the rules were the same. But the stakes now, they were unimaginably higher. As she stepped into the cockpit, she saw the co-pilot fighting desperately with the controls, his face soaked in sweat and panic. Warnings continued flashing bright red across the instrument screens like angry eyes screaming disaster. Oxygen masks swung wildly above the unconscious captain as a flight attendant attempted chest compressions that seemed to do nothing. The co-pilot looked up at her with disbelief. "You said you can fly. What experience?" She forced her voice to remain steady, even though her lungs tightened with pressure. "Single-engine Cessna Piper a few years ago. I'm not trained for this, but I can try." Her honesty made the situation even more terrifying. But it also made her brave. The co-pilot didn't have time to doubt. He slid his seat back and motioned for her to sit in the captain's chair, the chair that symbolized control, command, and certainty. Except now, certainty was gone. She took that seat anyway, her fingers slowly wrapped around the controls. They felt heavier than anything she had ever touched, like a responsibility too big for human hands. She stared at the complex panel in front of her, dozens of buttons and switches blinking, systems she didn't know, features she had never practiced. Her throat felt dry, her body felt too warm, but the cockpit air felt cold, suffocatingly cold. The co-pilot snapped on his radio headset and spoke urgently into the mic, his voice cracking under the gravity of the moment. Mayday, Mayday, we have a situation. Captain is unconscious. A civilian is attempting to land the aircraft. Repeat, an untrained civilian is attempting to land a passenger plane. On the other end, the ground control team went silent for a moment. A silence that said everything. This is bad. This is impossible. Then a voice responded, steady but shaken. Understood. We will assist any way we can. We need her name, experience, anything. The co-pilot turned toward her again. She hesitated, then spoke softly. My name is Emily Carter. For the first time since she stood up, she heard her own name, and hearing it made this moment feel terrifyingly real. Ground control repeated it. Emily Carter, we are with you. Tell us what you need. What she needed was years of commercial pilot training, thousands of hours in the air, countless emergency drills, but she didn't have any of that. What she had was instinct, a memory of flight, and the courage to sit in this seat. The control tower team quickly checked flight history, but of course, they found nothing that could reassure them. She was a nobody in aviation terms, but right now, she was the only hope in this sky. Her eyes scanned the view through the cockpit windows, clouds, sunlight, horizon, all peaceful outside, while inside everything was chaos. She took one long breath. Calm, she needed calm. She placed her hands firmly on the control yoke, feeling the plane's subtle movements. It was like a living thing, nervous, scared, shaking, depending on her. The co-pilot guided her through quick steps. Keep your wings level. Watch the altitude, easy on the throttle. She nodded, absorbing every word like oxygen. She remembered how to read some instruments, enough to understand that the plane was descending too quickly. She lifted gently, just as she used to. The aircraft responded, leveling out. Yes, she thought, I still remember. That tiny success gave her a drop of confidence, the first drop in a sea she needed to fill. Down in the cabin, passengers clung to each other, unaware of the technical struggles but fully aware that something extraordinary was happening. A mother whispered prayers into her daughter's hair. A man held his wife's hand so tightly their fingers turned white. Strangers leaned on strangers. Hope was fragile, fear was everywhere, but somewhere inside that fear, they were rooting for her, this ordinary woman who had become their extraordinary lifeline. Ground control's calm instructions flowed steadily now, trying to guide Emily step by step through procedures that most pilots take years to master. Emily, listen carefully when you approach the runway. Align the nose with the centerline. Small adjustments only. If you overcorrect, the aircraft will bounce or veer. She whispered to herself, small adjustments, calm. Her hands steadied, her breathing evened out. The co-pilot watched her, still terrified, but also amazed. There was something different about her, not skill, not training, courage. A rare kind of courage that doesn't come from knowing what to do, but from deciding to do it anyway. The flight attendants continued trying to revive the captain, but nothing changed. His absence in the cockpit hung heavy, a reminder that this wasn't just a challenge, it was a rescue. Every life behind her was a heartbeat counting on her every move. She felt their invisible presence press against her back, urging her not to fail. The aircraft's nose slowly aligned with the distant runway on the radar display, a thin line of hope. You're doing good, the co-pilot encouraged, trying to keep her focused. She nodded again, swallowing the fear that wanted to scream inside her. Her forehead was damp, her palms slick. She tightened her grip to hide the shaking. The ground team's voices grew more urgent now. Emily, listen, the final approach will be the hardest. The aircraft will feel like it wants to drop. Don't fight too much, guide it, trust yourself, trust myself. The words echoed in her head like a prayer. She had never trusted herself more than now. Not in school, not in work, not in love, but in this insane, impossible moment. She had to believe she could do the impossible. Because everyone else had no choice but to believe in her, the plane hit turbulence, a sharp jolt that made the entire flight jump. People screamed, luggage shook above them. A tray fell loudly in the galley. Emily closed her eyes for half a second and inhaled sharply. Focus, she corrected the wings just as ground control had told her. The plane steadied again. The co-pilot watched in stunned silence. He knew seasoned pilots who would crack under this kind of pressure. Yet this civilian woman, she was holding the sky together. Down below, emergency teams and firefighters gathered near the runway, vehicles flashing red and blue lights, ready for anything, crash or miracle. They all looked up, waiting to see if courage could truly conquer fear, if a stranger could do what professionals trained their entire lives for. Back up in the cockpit, Emily's heartbeat synced with the rhythm of landing preparation. She could feel the aircraft responding to her, trusting her, the same way she trusted it. One wrong move and everything ends. One right move and she becomes the reason hundreds of families won't mourn today. The co-pilot whispered, maybe to her, maybe to himself, "You can do this." And for the first time since she sat down, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could. She wasn't a hero because she knew what to do. She was a hero because she dared to try. And now, with the runway drawing closer every second, the fate of everyone on board rested not on experience but on courage. 180 lives now depended on her, the woman who stood up when nobody else could. Emily slipped fully into the captain's seat, the very place where only minutes ago a trained professional had controlled this massive aircraft with confidence and ease. Now she sat there, wearing a headset that suddenly felt heavier than steel, a thin band pressing against her temples as sweat gathered and slowly traced down her forehead. Her heart was beating so fast she could hear it echoing in her ears, louder than the roaring engines outside. She whispered to herself, barely audible over the alarms and wind noise, "Stay calm, trust yourself." The words were both a command and a fragile prayer. Her fingers wrapped around the control yoke, and the enormity of what she was attempting crashed into her all at once. She was about to land a passenger jet, a machine she had never flown, carrying more than 100 souls desperate to live. The co-pilot talked her through every step, voice shaking but steady enough to keep her anchored. "You're lined up with the runway, just keep her straight, slow descent." Through the cockpit windows, the runway appeared just a speck at first, then a long strip of gray stretching across the earth, like a saving path laid down by destiny itself. With every second, it grew larger, closer, more real. Behind her, she could almost feel the passengers' fear pressing against her spine, every heartbeat behind those rows of seats adding weight to her hands. Some cried quietly, some clenched their teeth, some prayed, their eyes squeezed shut. But nobody spoke loudly, nobody wanted to break the fragile thread of hope that now hung between survival and disaster. The aircraft began to descend faster, too fast. Warning lights flickered again. A red number blinked furiously on the display, screaming that this approach was steep and dangerous. Ground control's voice crackled through the headset. "Ease back." Emily lifted the nose slightly. She swallowed hard, tasting the dryness in her mouth, and gently pulled back, just a touch. The plane responded, not perfectly, but enough to slow its fall. Wind rushed loudly around them, rattling panels, reminding her how much force she was battling. Her arms trembled. She wasn't sure if it was from the tension or the weight of the controls fighting her every move. She could hear someone behind her mutter, "Please God, please," and she shut everything out except the view ahead. The runway threshold was seconds away. Her breathing quickened, her palms burned from gripping too tightly. She was close, so close, and yet one tiny mistake could mean everything. The ground rushed upward faster than her courage wanted to handle, but she refused to give in to fear. She remembered the co-pilot's instructions, small adjustments. Trust, guide it, don't force it, then impact. The wheels hit the runway with a loud, shocking thud. The cabin jolted violently, throwing people against their seatbelts. A ripple of gasps, screams, and cries erupted through the aircraft. Emily's stomach flipped. The plane didn't stay on the ground, it bounced. Lifted back into the air for a terrifying moment, like it was reconsidering whether to land at all. The co-pilot shouted, "Hold steady, don't overcorrect." She gritted her teeth, fighting the panic rising in her chest. No, not now, not after coming so far. She tightened her grip, nudging the nose down again with the gentlest of movements her shaking hands could manage. The ground rose up once more, and this time she was ready. The wheels made contact again, harder than she hoped, but solid, real, gripping the earth instead of abandoning it. The screech of rubber tearing against asphalt roared through every corner of the aircraft. Sparks of friction, noise, power, everything happening at once. Screech, the sound was terrifying and beautiful. It meant they were really landing, not flying, landing. Emily slammed her foot down on the brakes just as the co-pilot instructed. The engines roared in reverse thrust, shaking the plane like a wild animal trying to break free. The cabin rattled, a baby cried, someone shouted in panic, but Emily didn't hear any of it. All she heard was the battle happening beneath the aircraft. Wheels gripping, metal vibrating, gravity pulling them safely home. The aircraft slowed inch by inch, her chest tight with anticipation, her fingers numb, her breath held hostage by the moment. And then silence, absolute silence. The engines wound down, the alarms ceased, the motion stopped. The world, for the first time since the nightmare began, stood still. They were down, they were safe. Emily stared forward in disbelief, her eyes wide, hands frozen on the controls. It took her several seconds to remember she still needed to breathe. The co-pilot exhaled a breath he had been holding far too long and looked at her with something close to awe, maybe even gratitude beyond words. Behind them, the cabin was completely silent, a silence thicker than fear, heavier than shock. The kind that only comes when people are too overwhelmed to immediately react to the fact that they are still alive. Then the first sound, a single sob of relief, then another, a laugh, a shout, and suddenly applause. Loud, uncontrollable applause that filled the entire aircraft, exploding into cheers, cries, clapping hands, and voices praising the woman who just saved their lives. Strangers hugged each other. People kissed the tops of their children's heads, tears streaming freely. Some passengers simply closed their eyes, whispering thank yous to the universe for the miracle they had just witnessed. Emily released the controls, finally letting her aching muscles relax. Her hands trembled violently now that the danger had passed, and she covered her mouth as tears blurred her vision. The adrenaline that had kept her steady now abandoned her, leaving behind the raw emotion of what she had accomplished. She had done it, not perfectly, not smoothly, not like a pilot trained for years in simulators and classrooms. But she had landed a massive commercial jet with courage, instinct, and heart when everyone else was too afraid to try. She glanced back at the unconscious captain, then at the co-pilot, who whispered hoarsely, "Emily, you saved us." His voice cracked with relief. Ground control spoke again, this time overwhelmed and proud. "Welcome back to Earth, Flight 397. Incredible job, Emily." For a moment, Emily didn't feel like a random passenger anymore. She didn't feel like the forgotten woman who once flew small planes only to give up her dreams. In this moment, she was a pilot, the pilot who refused to let fear be the final decision. She had taken responsibility no one asked her to take, stepped into a role no one believed she could fill, and she triumphed. As emergency crews rushed toward the aircraft outside, the world waited to meet the unexpected hero who had risen from the cabin to the cockpit, who had taken control when everything was falling apart. Emily wiped her tears, still shaking, but a quiet smile crept onto her face. She didn't need applause. She didn't need fame. She just needed to know one thing, that every person on this plane had another tomorrow because she refused to let today be their last. She stayed calm, she trusted herself, and because she did, they were safe. The brakes roared angrily beneath the aircraft, a deep and thunderous growl that vibrated through the floor and rattled every heart on board. Emily felt the force push her forward as the plane decelerated, her body finally releasing the tension it had carried like steel cables pulled to their limit. Inch by inch, miracle by miracle, the aircraft slowed slower, slower, until motion faded into stillness. And for one endless, breathless moment, There was nothing, no screams, no alarms, no fear, just silence. The kind of silence that only comes after life has been returned to those who thought they were seconds away from losing it. Then, suddenly, the cabin erupted not with panic, not with terror, but with the loudest applause Emily had ever heard in her life. It hit her like a wave washing over her, drowning her trembling heart in relief, admiration, and raw, overwhelming gratitude. The co-pilot's chair scraped against the floor as he stood, tears welling in his exhausted eyes. Before she could even react, he pulled her into a tight embrace, a hug full of all the emotions words could never carry. His voice cracked as he whispered into her ear, "You just saved every one of us." Emily felt her entire chest collapse into tears. She had been too focused to cry earlier. People behind them shouted her name now, Emily, 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 cheering like she was a legend they had always known, a hero written in history. She turned slowly, looking back through the cockpit door at faces filled with awe and disbelief. Mothers holding children tight, elderly passengers wiping tears, strangers clutching each other like family. In every pair of eyes she saw the same truth. She was the reason they were alive. She didn't wear a uniform. She wasn't standing there with wings pinned to her chest or badges that earned respect. She didn't carry years of commercial training or thousands of hours logged in the sky. Emily Carter was just a woman, a passenger, someone who had once let go of her dream of flying because life had convinced her it wasn't hers to claim. And yet when the world needed a pilot, she became one. When fate demanded a leader, she stood up. When fear silenced everyone else, she chose courage. That courage had brought them back to Earth. That courage was the reason hundreds of families would smile tonight instead of mourn. As the applause continued, flight attendants rushed down the aisle to open the doors and bring emergency crews aboard. Bright daylight spilled into the cabin, illuminating the faces of survivors, each one reflecting a story that wouldn't have existed if Emily hadn't stepped forward. Medics hurried into the cockpit, lifting the unconscious captain from his seat. Emily stepped aside, her legs wobbly, realizing for the first time that her entire body was drained, every muscle, every heartbeat exhausted from holding on to hope. The co-pilot guided her out of the chair, treating her not like a guest who got lucky, but like a fellow aviator, a partner who had fought beside him in the sky. When she took her first step back into the cabin, cheers exploded louder than before. A little girl reached out, touching Emily's hand as if she were made of magic. A man bowed his head respectfully as she passed. Some passengers simply stared, their emotions too heavy to speak. Cameras flashed, phones recorded. People wanted proof that ordinary people could become miracles, proof that heroes don't always come from textbooks or uniforms. Sometimes they come from row 17, seat B. Emily stopped walking for just a moment, taking in the sight of the runway outside, emergency lights flickering, firefighters standing ready, ground crew watching with stunned admiration. How close they had come to disaster, how unbelievably close, and yet here they were, stepping back onto solid earth. She felt the sun on her face, warm and grounding, the gentle breeze brushing away the last remnants of terror. Her knees weakened, but the co-pilot caught her elbow, steadying her. "You did it," he said again, almost like he needed to repeat it to believe it was real. Paramedics insisted on checking her, feeling her pulse, examining her shaking hands, but she gently pushed them back. "Please," she whispered, "take care of everyone else first." That single sentence made the medic pause, because even after saving them, her instinct was to protect others. The passengers lined up behind her, filing safely down the stairs, each giving her a nod or a whisper of thanks as they passed. One elderly woman held Emily's hand tightly, pressing her forehead to it. "My grandchildren are waiting at home," she said, voice quivering. "Because of you, I will see them again." Emily's eyes blurred with tears once more, not from fear this time, from the sheer beauty of life continuing. Outside, reporters already began gathering at the perimeter. sensing a story of impossible bravery had unfolded. But Emily didn't care about headlines. She didn't want praise, fame, or even recognition. She stared at the jet she had guided home, a machine too large for someone like her, a challenge too great for someone so unprepared, yet she had done it. She had looked death in the eyes and refused to blink. The co-pilot stepped beside her, arms crossed over his chest, a proud smile on his face. "I hope you never doubt yourself again," he said softly. "You belong in that seat more than you know." Emily let out a shaky breath. For years she had buried her passion under a blanket of self-doubt, convinced that her dream belonged only to the lucky, the trained, the chosen. But today proved something far larger than aviation. It proved that courage isn't earned through certificates, it's chosen in a moment. The captain was wheeled past them, still unconscious but stable. Emily placed a hand lightly on the railing of the stretcher as it passed, a silent wish for his recovery, a quiet thanks for the seat she had filled in his place. When he awoke, she wondered if he would believe what had happened, that a civilian had saved his aircraft, his passengers, his entire world. When she finally stepped aside to allow the emergency crews to finish their work, the applause continued, echoing across the runway, bouncing off the terminal walls like the sound of hope returning home. She closed her eyes briefly, letting the noise wash over her one last time, letting herself truly feel, the reality of what she had done. She had saved lives. She had given strangers a second chance. She had proven that heroes aren't defined by uniforms, but by moments when fear tells you to sit down and courage tells you to stand. This moment would never leave her, nor would it leave the hearts of the passengers who would carry her story home and tell it for years, to children, to friends, to anyone who doubted the strength within ordinary people. They would say, "There was a woman on our flight. We didn't know her name. We didn't think she was anyone special. But when everything went wrong, she stood up and became the hero we needed. She didn't wear a uniform. She wasn't a pilot anymore. But on the day the world needed one, she became one, and that was enough to change everything." The end airplane fired